here to my right, Eleanor Blomstrom, stand up. There she is. And we have Nurgul. Yes. I'm sorry. I know her so well as just Nurgul. And we have Hori, who is busy in the back at the moment, but she's waving at you. And Hori is part of our team. We also have a number of people in the room who will be helping with this training, and that includes some of you. I'd like to tell you how we started this project in a very short history. We were confronted with very strong delegations from NGOs and governments who knew how to negotiate very well, because they were being taken to a center in Arizona just before the Commission on the Status of Women meeting, and they were being trained on how to negotiate well, how to use the UN language, and how to get around the UN. Because of that, we were losing ground. So about 4 years ago, with the great help of Switzerland, and since then, Germany and Ireland, we have developed the advocacy training in order to give us, the majority voice at the UN, a better set of skills and knowledge about how the UN is working. Today you're going to get that, but you're also going to get information about the Sustainable Development Goals, which will help you at this particular meeting, and an insight into the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, which is the centerpiece of the way in which we think the SDGs should be implemented. With that, I'm going to hand this over to our great team. They're going to do an introduction, and then I'm going to come back and talk to you later.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Soon Young. And as she said, my name is Eleanor Blomstrom, and I'm very happy to be here with you. If you're having trouble hearing at any point, please wave and say something. Oh, I'm in front of it. Okay. So we're navigating cords and computers with presentations. So today we have a packed morning, and we look forward to sharing it with you. One thing we want to agree on is that this is a safe and respectful and inclusive space where questions are welcome, and we also want to both recognize expertise and the opportunity to learn while we're here from each other. And we do really want you to bring in your questions and your examples along the way. As Soon Young said, really we're trying to use this space to build capacity around content and context and advocacy skills about women's human rights in the context of Beijing +25 and the HLPF and the SDGs. And then we have a couple guidebooks that should help you through this, which we're not going to go into in great depth or step by step, but they're there as really important and valuable resources. And there'll be some advocacy tools along the way as well, and some ideas about how to go about the global advocacy as well as regional advocacy from some of the experts in the room. And this is just an outline of the agenda, so you can see more or less the structure. That we'll start with Beijing, go into the HLPF and SDGs, talk about the power of language, get a little more in depth on regional perspectives. Then we'll get into global advocacy and what does that look like in practice. And at the end, we would love to have your questions and your evaluations. And Nurgul's going to help us get to know you. You've already been able to introduce yourselves at the table, so we have some quick questions.
Good morning again. Repeating my name, Nurgul Janaiva. I am from Kyrgyzstan, 20 hours from here. Happy to be your trainer. Now it's very important to know each other because we shall be working in the groups around the tables. So let's use this time to introduce yourself. And if you ask this question, but let me run through number of times at HLPF. 5. Who were here 5 times? Quite a number. How many of you were 3 times here? At least 3. How many of you were 2 times here? How how many first time are here? This is the training floor. That's what we were hoping, that it will be very useful. And for newcomers at HLTF, you are advocates for women's rights. If you discuss now within your groups the following question: what's your favorite SDG? SDG. Who knows what is SDG? Okay, sustainable development goals. So are you? It would be very good if you discuss within the group, introduce yourself, and inform if you are participating in regional Beijing plus 25. At what level do you work, and in what region? Introduce yourself. In the end, a couple of minutes, it will be great if you will put expectations from the training. You have 5 minutes for introducing yourself and for using this to write down your expectation. Is it manageable? Okay, great. Thank you. So we start introducing, because later your group work will be more concentrated on the substance, and it will be good if you know your names, are you first time, and if you know responses from each other on these questions. Your 5 minutes started. Okay.
Who am I? I'm Will. Yeah, we are. Yeah, I know. Beijing. Yes. So I've been in I represent Santi. And before that, I started out representing the World Association of Organized Hero Scouts, and then I represented a small fund. I have some but if you put educational in space. I have devoted myself to
2.5 minutes left. Ariel?
I'm Mary.
My name is Teresa Portugal. I am an NGO representative for Sisters of Charity Federation based here in New York. So I have been attending HLTF from the beginning.
I am Sita. I belong to religious congregations, Sisters of Notre Dame. I'm based in Kenya.
Yes, so yeah, because I'm American. So I come from programs, but now I'm still working for the international team. That's why that's my first time. It's good to learn more about democracy and something else.
So did you ever see the
Dear friends, your last meeting to share your expectations. We'll collect
That was TPFA.
expectations. Now, dear friends, thank you very much for taking your time and sharing your expectations and introducing each other. Despite that we have 3 hours, still there is a lot of information that can be used to facilitate our engagement in the Beijing Plus, in SDG, in various women's programs. Dear friends, so there is a guidebook. Everyone has a copy of the guidebook, which has more details. This guidebook is very helpful. It exists in several languages: French, Spanish, and even Russian. So it's available online. It's available. Everyone has a copy. The other very important is a resource of information for you later to learn and to be engaged more in Beijing Plus 25 process. It's a guide for national NGO guidance for national parallel reports. This document also exists in several languages, and we will be referring to this document. But these 2 documents are very important. They have more details and can be used by you not only for your own knowledge, but using in women's movement in your sub-region, in your regions. So now let me give the floor to one of the main parts of our meeting, of our training today, Beijing Plus 25. Our fantastic Sun Yang will be sharing the process, and it's a big process, and it's actually something that gives us so much promises. Sun Yang, please.
Thank you. How do I change?
I'll do it.
For me. Thank you very much. Okay, so I would like to start with a quiz. Can we start with a quiz? There we are, our quiz. So, are you listening? Okay. How many ministers of women's affairs were at the UN First World Conference in Mexico? That's the First World Conference on Women, held in Mexico in 1995. How many ministers of women's
75.
1975. The first World Conference on Women. So how many of you say 10?
Less than 10.
Okay, 10? No, you can't do less than 10. 5.
Yes.
Okay, we got some 5. 0. Okay, so this is the most knowledgeable table, obviously, because they've heard this quiz before. We had 0. And why did we have 0? We had 0 because the concept had not been introduced yet. So when I think of the progress we've made in our women's movement with the United Nations, I go back to that very simple fact that in 1975, there was not a single Ministry of Women's Affairs or gender equality in the world. And now every country has something equivalent to that. So let's applaud ourselves. We have done something very special in institutional change, a structural change in the way we govern. Second question. How many times was gender mentioned in the 3rd World Conference on Women in Nairobi in 1985? How many times was gender? How many times? 10? Come on, guys, now you're scared of me. 5? Okay, so you got it. It was 0. It was 0. Why was it 0? It was 0 because, in fact, the concept of gender was so controversial because it opened up the possibility that you had not biological determination of male and female, but a social construction, which allowed, therefore, for us to have actual sexual orientation choice. So when did we achieve that name, that concept in a global UN document? It wasn't until the Beijing Women's Conference. The concept was being developed in universities, at the University of Michigan in my department, for example. We've been discussing for a long time, but it did not come into our language until 1995. And as you know, last CSW and ever since, it has been a contested concept, precisely for exactly the same reasons that it never got on our agenda until 25 years ago. Third question. How many participants attended the UN Fourth World Conference on Women in 1995? Give me a number. Table number 1, give me a number.
Moi, j'ai préparé, mais je ne suis pas partie.
She said that she would have liked to have been there, but she wasn't the one person. So how many participants total? United Nations, media, NGO Forum? 20,000. Wrong. 30,000. Wrong. 50,000. 50,000 plus her if she had been there. 50,000 plus, but I want you to know that it was the first time that we had the ability to actually do a lot of internet connection. In fact, the NGO Forum installed the first internet connection at an international conference in 1995. And so we actually had a global participation at that conference, which was in the millions, which is why every country that we know of was reporting on that conference at the time. So let's just reflect, because that's what we did. It was not the United Nations that created that conference. We, the women's feminist and women's movement, and our allies and other social movements are the ones who used the UN space, who brought our issues to the UN when our governments would not listen to us, and created this collective force, this consensus, which we could then take back and work on in our own countries. So the next question was, why was it important? I think I just answered that. So in addition to the things I've just mentioned, which are very clear markers, I want to point out some things that I thought happened at that meeting. I was one of the organizers of that forum, and I watched the development of our thinking through time. First thing, I think, was a paradigm shift, that we claimed all issues as women's issues. It wasn't just for women's, so-called traditional women's issues, but we claimed the right to speak on all issues. And the slogan of the NGO Forum was, look at the world through women's eyes. See something different when you look at climate through women's eyes, when you look at safety in cities through women's eyes, because for us, safety in cities means we're also safe at home. And same with the issue of violence. Violence does not mean just street violence, it means also violence at home. So we brought that into the perspective very clearly as a collective group, I felt, in 1995. There was also a recognition of what we call intersectionality, a very clear understanding that feminism didn't belong to the North, it didn't belong to a particular group, but that it was the strength of our movement to bring all the diversities that needed to be there clearly in the document. So if you look at the Beijing Platform for Action, you will see that there is an acknowledgement of the importance of very particular groups, including girls and women of all ages, meaning also women who are aged, those living with disabilities, indigenous women, those rural women, all the particular groups that we now really appeal to be part of our identity as women are there in the document. And that was a really important contribution officially for the governments to abide what is interesting to me is that after the conference, we are just beginning to uncover the impact of that World Conference on national level. I just came from Korea last week, actually. And my Korean colleagues, by the way, have translated the NGO guidelines into Korean already, and they're distributing and doing a national parallel report. They said, I was talking to the former Minister of Gender there, and she said that Korea's development would not have happened without that conference. And she explained that the women who went to that conference came back, used CEDAW, used the Beijing Platform for Action in Parliament, and they changed the family law. Very, very basic thing. They changed who could inherit land. And they used those documents to argue their case, and they won. Those kinds of changes, including the introduction of women's studies, things that actually changed the next generation's perspective of what they could do, changed Korea's total economic development potential, because women then began to take leadership. Women actually in the rural areas were also included in this very dramatic change. So take a Confucian society like Korea, give it 25 years, and you've got the first woman foreign minister, Kang Kyung-pa, who was deputy director of the Human Rights Council. This was me in 1995. Talking with different generations. So what would we like to see for Beijing Plus 25? I'm just giving you some ideas to think about. One of them is definitely to strengthen the relationship between our movement and the United Nations, to keep that space, our space, and the majority voice space. To also have a stronger intergenerational relationship. And I would like to say here that it would be very important for us to give very serious thought of how we can use Beijing Plus 25 for changing intergenerational dialogue discussions into intergenerational long-term relationships. There is a big difference. So we can hold dialogues, but what really is going to carry us forward is to maintain a very close relationship. So in your NGOs, perhaps what you'll do is set up a mentoring program. There is a group in Hong Kong that has been doing this for 10 years. They have a very interesting methodology where they talk about proteges, and they assign people from other generations to help them not only through their postgraduate years, but throughout their lifetime. And this is a very interesting concept. I think as feminists, you have something to offer, and it would be wonderful if we set up mentoring programs. The theme of the Decade for Women was, can anyone tell me? 1975 to 1985. What was the theme? We had 3 words: equality, development, and peace. Equality, development, and peace. And at the time, like we do for the SDGs, we argued that you cannot have one without the other. So let's return a little bit to that basic concept as we think of the SDGs, because they pretty much capture for us all of the SDGs. If you find them, if you rephrase this as, in a negative way, the culture of inequality, the culture of unsustainable development, and the culture of violence, you have, I think, our agenda. You may know, you may not know, that the reason how did the whole world, and particularly all the governments in the United Nations, decide on those. The peace agenda, interestingly enough, came from the Soviet bloc and from Eastern Europe. They brought that in and argued very hard for it. The development agenda came from the developing countries. And the equality agenda came from mostly from Europe and North America. and that was the global compromise. Next. So what can governments do and the UN do in Beijing Plus 95? We need to bring all these pieces together, and the governments are the ones who are mainly responsible for doing this. Here at the SDGs, when we talk about Goal 10 on inequality, Goal 4 on education, Goal 16 on peace, 13 on climate, Goal 17, we need to make sure that women's human rights is squarely in the middle of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's CEDAW, right? So our Women's Treaty needs to be there with the Sustainable Development Goals. And that CEDAW is legally binding. Its twin for us on the women's agenda is the Beijing Platform for Action, which is a policy document. Policy document, Beijing Platform, you have CEDAW right in the middle of the two, and then you have the SDGs. And this is what the governments really need to focus on.
Sunil, I'm sorry, can you speak up for Facebook Live?
Sorry?
Facebook Live is saying speak up.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Next. And governments are shaping our agenda, but we also need to take action ourselves, and here's some ideas. We can certainly mobilize around the national parallel reports to present to governments. Now, unfortunately for us, many of the government reports have already come in, but that doesn't prevent us from mobilizing around the parallel reports. Because we can use these reports well, not just to hire a consultant and have some data collected, but to gather national or local meetings to discuss what is in these parallel reports and how we can praise and raise what we're doing in them. We can hold public events on the Beijing Platform for Action and CEDAW. The Cities for CEDAW campaign can accelerate and intensify their education of the public on CEDAW, but with the Beijing Platform for Action, which can be adopted in cities, just as the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Accord are being adopted in some cities already. Young feminists in the room and in the world can take leadership on intergenerational dialogue and to set that agenda that I discussed earlier. Next. Let me talk a little bit more about the NGO parallel reports. Why don't we call them shadow reports? Shadow reports typically take a government report and they critique that report to tell the truth. We are going to do that, but we are also going to praise and raise things that we see that our governments are doing. And that could be national governments, that could be state governments, that could be city governments, that could be village agreements. But let's use this space to also talk about the things that we would like the world to see that are good examples, and to praise and raise ourselves. If you have been doing something spectacular to contribute to the feminist and women's movement, let's also report that in our parallel reports. How can we make sure that governments are learning about them? I'm going to let Huri talk more about that, which are the various events that are going to happen in the fall. 6 to 7 May in Mexico, 7 to 10 July in France will be places, and also of course CSW 64, places where we can bring the thinking that we have developed through our NGO parallel reports, and even in some cases present them to governments. Next. Some of the themes that you will see next year, I was just mentioning here, the ones that I can see developing myself at different meetings, are peace and climate change. I think those two are going to be extremely high on our feminist and women's movement agenda, but also technology. Technology, how is it that we can use the latest technology to create satellite events, to communicate our messages, but also to capture this moment in women's history for other generations. So here are 2 projects which we invite you to participate in. They won't be launched until the fall, but one of them is an online book called My Memories and Messages for the Next Generation. How many of you in the room attended any of the women's conferences, UN Women's Conferences? There you are. So even though it says Beijing, we are inviting you, if you attended any of the meetings, to contribute your memory, your page, your picture, your video, your song, your piece of art that you want to tell your story, not only of what happened to you in a memorable moment, what did you do when you came home that made a difference, that you want the next generation to know about? That's you. Then we have another book too called My Issues, Hopes, and Dreams, and we are going to invite young artists who never probably even heard about Beijing to also post what they want to say on those issues, the 12 critical areas of concern. By artists we mean musicians, filmmakers, journalists, actors. We will work with design people as well, architects, to contribute their stories. Next. Is there a next? Yeah. Okay, so let's all use Beijing Plus 25 to educate ourselves, because when we know more and can speak from the facts, can speak from the actual policy document that we're standing on, that we review, by the way, every CSW is reviewing this document. The more we know about that, the better we are at our negotiations and the stronger we are as teachers. Thank you.
Corey, will we be able to access these slides?
We can share.
Yeah.
We will share.
We will share. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sun Young, for that amazing, inspiring presentation. I just want to take a moment and say something Sun Young mentioned in her presentation about going forward, about mentorship. Sun Young is my mentor. I would not be here if Sun Young had not tapped my shoulder 8 years ago and said, "What are you doing? Come on, join us." I could have, but I was in a different world. And I just wanted to mention that because I think it's really, really important going forward that we realize that it's wonderful that what you all have done in the last 25, 35, 40 years. But there's so many of us, I'm not youth, by the way, I'm not pointing to the youth, but there's so many of us who have the passion, especially the youth. So even though I'm not youth, I am going to make sure I'm going to reach out to the youth of our generation and say, your voice matters. It doesn't matter if you missed the first wave of feminist movement, the second wave of feminists, we are all feminists. So I just wanted to start up with that. And also say that I've been working with UN Women, and some of you in the room already have been in conversations with what is going to happen for the next year. So what I like about it, first of all, let me just say this, I think Sun Young didn't mention that. Why are we not having a 5th Women's World Conference, right? People have been talking about this since I've been in the UN system. Beijing was so wonderful, and why are we not having another 5th Women's World Conference? And the bottom line is, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, that people who know the system know that if we do try to, or even going to have all the advancements that we did have with Beijing Platform for Action. So fine, and I always say that there are so many documents in UN, in governments, that we can still use to achieve more of what's missing. You know, recreating new documents is not going to advance us as much as really teaching the knowledge, letting people know that we have rights that we're not even achieving yet. There is no implementation, and most of us don't even know how to hold our governments accountable. So what we're hoping to do in the next year is really educate ourselves, bring on more feminists into the movement, bring on the new generation and excite them to work with us to achieve. what is going to be called #Generation Equality. So that is a phrase that UN Women has researched and decided, and I actually love it. They were trying to decide what other names to come up for the forum, but generation equality is what it is. So basically what's going to happen in the next year, as you can see, the forum will be convened by UN Women, co-chaired by France and Mexico. And Sun Yang already mentioned, we'll see on another slide, there will be a meeting in Mexico and a meeting in Paris, May and July. Now, on our way there, though, there's definitely the national reviews happening right now. So if you have any connections with your governments, please follow up with them. And at the same time, as Sun Yang mentioned, we have our own parallel reports that are available on NGO CSW website. I really do encourage everyone to do that as well. So that's the part that where it says partnership with civil society, and we together with states, we will definitely go forward with our advocacy. Next slide. So we are gathering voices of women, youth, gender equality, and there is this hope for action coalitions. We'll see how that evolves. I mean, this whole year is going to be an interactive dialogue needed action, where we're going to be talking to you and figuring out how is it that we can mobilize and galvanize more people to take action. So your opinions really do matter. Now, here's our map of how it's happening. So we have the national reviews. You all know there are regional reviews because there's also regional meetings that are happening from October to November. So all of those meetings will also inspire, galvanize, and bring people together for achievements. And then the March CSW 64, we're calling it the Super CSW 64. So we're all going to be gathering together to, again, bring more feminists together. There will be the forums in May and July. And the end result, of course, in 2020, member states will make statements on what specific actions they are going to take to achieve the 2030 SDG goals. What's really important is that everything we do in the next year to educate ourselves and galvanize and bring more people into the movement, it is really to prepare ourselves to know what we're doing from September 2020 on. So it doesn't end in September 2020, it actually begins. By then, we're all on the same team, we're working together to achieve our goals, and then we're gonna start helping our governments and ourselves for implementation and accountability. So if you have any questions, come and see me later. Email info@ngocsw.org.
And they can get this online.
That's right. These slides will be available. We'll put all of these slides on our website.
They're online already.
That's right, with the UN Women.
Yeah.
You mean, yes. Yeah, these slides are from UN Women. You can tell the logo, right? We're borrowing it. So thank you so much, and please email info@ngocsw.org if you have any questions, if you want to join the movement, you want to help us with our goals.
I'm sure everybody don't know who you are. Could you tell us who you are?
Oh, Huriga Delekian, Chair of NGOCSW New York.
Thank you.
And Sun Yang Menti. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lori, for that summary of what's happening at the global level from the global process. We have a few people who are sitting here who know about the dates for different regional forums coming up related to Beijing Plus 25. And so I wanted to give them a chance to just identify the dates for that now, and then later in the morning in the event, we'll have a chance to hear about issues from the regions and a little more detail on how to engage. But since we have this kind of roadmap here, I just wondered if, Sasha, did you want to give the dates?
Sure.
For the ECE?
Yeah. Fine.
This is pretty long, actually. I think I can pass it to you.
Oh, great. Hi everybody, I'm Sasha Gabizon. I'm with Women Engaged for a Common Future, and as an alternate to the regional organizing partner of the Women's Major Group, we have taken the initiative to help facilitate the Civil Society Forum on Beijing Plus 25 for the UNECE region, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which includes all of the EU countries, all of the Eastern European countries, all of the Western Balkan countries, so Turkey and the Western Balkans, all of the Caucasus countries and all of the Central Asian countries, and all of North America. So North America is part of our region, and we will have only one day, unlike some other regions who have really lobbied well, where the women's organizations have a 2 or 3 day pre-meeting. We will have a 1 day meeting, which is on Monday, the 28th of October in Geneva. It is funded by UN Women, and they are renting out a big